Hi everyone, great to see you all again. I hope you're well. Got a good story for you today. But before I go on to it, I wonder whether you've ever upset anybody in your time. I have, many a time in fact. My mum and dad and friends, possibly you've done the same. But afterwards, and sometimes after a kind of an hour or so, I think to myself, I must say sorry. And I've done that, and maybe you have as well. But wouldn't it be great if you've said sorry and the person turned round to you and said, hey, never mind, that's okay, no problem. Well, that would be nice. And that really does kind of give us a theme of this story today. So make sure you've got listening ears on. It's called The Servant King. However, I hope you forgive me, but we've got the rap to do. And we're going to do it through twice, as you know. And I've been practicing. Shh, I'll have a go. Ready? Let's open the book. Let's take a look. Let's listen and see how good God can be. Let's take a look. Let's open the book. Let's open the book. Let's take a look. Let's listen and see how good God can be. Let's take a look. Let's open the book. Wow, I think I got it through right to the end. Sorry if I didn't and if I made a mistake, but I'm sure you got it perfect. So lots of sorries there, isn't there? So let's get on with the story, The Unforgiving Servant. Well, it started with Peter and Jesus having a walk together. And Peter had a kind of question to ask Jesus. Jesus, he said, if somebody hurts me and then says, I'm really sorry, how many times should I forgive him? And say, hey, that's okay. Now, before Jesus could answer, Peter offered his own answer. He thought it might sound good, and he thought it would be like big-hearted, and he thought it might be the kind of thing that Jesus would like to see and hear. Should I forgive him, say, 7 times, he said. It seemed like a lot of times to Peter, but actually Jesus wasn't impressed. No, answered Jesus, not 7 times, but 70 times 7 times. Well, Peter started doing his quick sums and realised that that was a whole lot of times, a whole lot of sorries, more times than probably Peter had forgiven anybody. That was a lot of sums, 490 times actually, however. So Jesus said, hang on, Peter, let me tell you a story. So Jesus went on to say to Peter, now listen up. Once upon a time there was a king, and one of his servants owed him some money. Not a little bit of money, but a lot of money. In fact, loads and loads of money. And I'm talking about millions and millions. So one day the king called the servant and told him to be brought before him. And because he could not pay what he owed the king, he commanded this man and his family to be sold. Well, the servant was so upset when he heard this. He said and cried, I am really, really sorry. Please, 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 give me another chance to pay. I will pay back everything I owe. It might just take a bit of time. And the king sat back and he looked at the servant and actually felt very sorry for him. And then, much to the servant's surprise, smiled and said, hey, that's okay. Then the king called off the debt and actually set the servant free. Well, the servant didn't lose any time. He got out and left the king straight away and left the palace. In fact, he was celebrating. And that's when he actually ran into another servant friend of his, a servant actually that owed him money. Not a load of money, not a lot of money either, but just maybe a couple of coins. That was all. Now, Did the first servant remember what the king had done for him? Not for 1 minute he didn't. He kind of grabbed hold of the second servant by the throat and he demanded to be paid. The second servant again begged him. "I'm really sorry," he said. I'll be patient with me. Please give me another chance. I will pay you back everything I owe. But instead, the first servant of saying, "Hey, that's okay," like the king did, the first servant had the second servant thrown into jail because he owed him money. Well, a few hours passed and word of this got back to the king. In fact, the king was very angry that the first servant had to be dragged back to him again. "When you came to see me," he said to the servant, "I really, really felt sorry for you. And I called off the debt. And I said, hey, that's okay. So answer me, why couldn't you do the same?" The first servant was just lost for words. And with that, the king had the servant thrown into jail until he could repay the money that he owed. Well, Jesus looked at his friend. You see, God is like that. God is like the king. "I'm really sorry," but that's what we say to him more times than we can count. It's even more times than that he tells us that that's okay. So when you say sorry to God, God actually says, "Hey, that's okay." "I'm really sorry," said Peter. "I didn't understand." And Jesus just smiled and said, "Hey, that's okay." And that really kind of ends our story. A lot of thinking, a lot of sorries, and a lot of heys, that's okay. Well, that had been a really big surprise for the man who had been let off millions of pounds, and he couldn't even forgive the second servant. Not just millions of pounds, but for a few pennies. No wonder the king had him thrown into jail for that. So on reflection to that story, and I hope you had listened well to that, let's just close our eyes for a moment. And did you notice at the end of the story, Jesus explained that God is like the king. He keeps on forgiving us and expects us to do the same. Think about whether you can be that kind of sort of person, the sort of person who can say, "Hey, that's okay," when somebody says sorry to you. Finally, I'd like you to keep your eyes closed because we're going to end this story with a prayer. And remember to make it your prayer at the end by saying amen together. Keep your eyes closed now and think through. Now I'm going to say a prayer. Dear God, we are like to be forgiven when we make mistakes. Please help us make the world a happy place by forgiving others and like God forgives us. Amen. Well, I made a few mistakes through that, but hopefully you got the crux of the story. So when somebody says sorry to you next time, amaze them by saying, "Hey, that's okay." And with that, I look forward to seeing you next time. You take care. Goodbye now. Bye.